When my daughter sold my dignity for clout, I drew a hard line, an ultimatum that could make her lose everything she took for granted. The mimosa glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the country club dining room as my daughter's words hit me like a physical blow. 23 years old, fresh out of college, and she was telling a table full of her friends that her father was just a janitor. Just a janitor. The contempt in her voice made my chest tighten with a pain I hadn't felt since her mother passed away 5 years ago. But what happened next would change everything between us forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there for months, maybe even years. The way Emma would change the subject whenever her college friends asked about my work. The embarrassed silence when I'd offer to pick her up from campus events. The careful way she'd introduce me at her graduation party, always mentioning that I worked at the university but never quite explaining what I did there. Father's Day had always been our special tradition. Even after Sarah died, Emma and I maintained our annual brunch at the Riverside Country Club. It was expensive, sure, but it was our day. Just the two of us, celebrating the bond that had carried us through the darkest period of our lives. This year felt different from the moment I walked into the dining room. Emma had invited 3 of her sorority sisters to join us. Madison, with her designer handbag worth more than most people's monthly rent. Ashley, whose father owned half the real estate downtown. And Brittany, who never missed an opportunity to mention her family's vacation home in the Hamptons. They sat around our table like a panel of judges, evaluating everything from the silverware to the way I pronounced certain words. The conversation started innocently enough. Madison was complaining about her internship at her father's law firm, how boring it was to file documents and answer phones for minimum wage. Ashley chimed in about her summer job at a boutique, lamenting that retail work was beneath someone with her education. That's when Brittany turned to Emma with that practiced smile that rich girls perfect in prep school. "So Emma, what does your dad do for work? I've been dying to know." I watched my daughter's face change. The confident young woman who'd graduated summa cum laude from business school suddenly looked like a trapped animal searching for an escape route. Her eyes darted to me, then back to her friends, weighing her options with the calculating precision I'd taught her when we used to work on math problems at our kitchen table. "He works at the university," she said carefully, hoping that would be enough. But Brittany wasn't satisfied. She leaned forward with the persistence of someone accustomed to getting answers. "What department? Is he a professor? A researcher? My uncle teaches economics at Yale." The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. I could have spoken up, could have saved Emma from the corner she'd painted herself into, but something held me back. Maybe it was curiosity about how she'd handle the situation. Maybe it was the need to know exactly where I stood in her estimation of worthiness. Emma's voice came out smaller than usual, almost apologetic. "He's maintenance staff. He cleans the buildings." Just like that, 25 years of single fatherhood were reduced to a job title that made her ashamed. The table went quiet, except for the soft clink of silverware against china from neighboring tables. Madison's eyebrows rose slightly. Ashley suddenly became fascinated with her eggs Benedict. Brittany's smile took on that particular quality of polite pity that wealthy people reserve for those they consider unfortunate. "Oh," Emma's voice gained strength as she continued, apparently deciding that if she was going to dig this hole, she might as well make it complete. "He's basically a janitor. You know, mopping floors, emptying trash cans, fixing broken toilets. It's honest work, I guess, but not exactly what I pictured for my father when I was growing up." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Honest work, I guess. The casual dismissal of everything I'd sacrificed to give her the opportunities she was now using to look down on me. The years of double shifts to pay for her dance lessons. The weekends spent working overtime so she could attend summer camps with her wealthier classmates. The nights I'd fallen asleep at our kitchen table, calculator in hand, figuring out how to stretch my paycheck to cover her college application fees. Madison recovered first, her voice dripping with the kind of false sympathy that made my skin crawl. "That must be difficult for you, Emma. I mean, when people ask about family backgrounds and career networking, my father always says connections are everything in business." Ashley nodded sagely. "Absolutely. It's all about who you know and what circles your family moves in." No offense to your dad, of course. She glanced at me with the look you might give a stray dog you felt sorry for, but wouldn't actually help. Brittany delivered the killing blow with surgical precision. Well, at least you've risen above your circumstances, Emma. Your education will open doors that were never available to your father. That's the American dream, right? Each generation doing better than the last. I sat there in my best shirt, the navy blue one I'd bought specifically for occasions like this, watching my daughter nod in agreement with these assessments of my inadequacy. The mimosa I'd ordered sat untouched, the bubbles slowly dying like my expectations for this day. Emma's response was what finally broke something inside me. You're absolutely right, Brittany. I've worked really hard to overcome my background. Sometimes I think about how different my life might have been if my father had been more ambitious, you know? If he'd pursued education or started his own business instead of settling for a job that anyone can do. Anyone can do. The phrase echoed in my head as I looked around the dining room at tables full of families celebrating Father's Day. Normal families where children honored their parents instead of apologizing for them. Families where fathers were sources of pride rather than embarrassment to be overcome. I thought about Sarah in that moment, how she used to brag to her friends about my work ethic, about how I could fix anything and never complained about the long hours. She had understood that dignity came from doing honest work well, not from impressing people with job titles. She'd seen strength in my calloused hands and pride in my ability to provide for our family through sheer determination. But Sarah was gone, and apparently her wisdom had died with her. The server appeared at our table, a young man probably working his way through college like I had 25 years ago. Can I get anyone dessert? Coffee? The girls ordered elaborate coffee drinks with names I couldn't pronounce. Emma asked for the crème brûlée, the most expensive dessert on the menu. I sat in silence, calculating in my head how much this meal was costing me. Not just the money, though that was significant on my salary. The real cost was becoming clear in ways I'd never anticipated. Madison started talking about her summer plans, 3 weeks in Europe with her boyfriend, visits to art museums and wine tastings in Tuscany. Ashley mentioned her family's annual trip to Martha's Vineyard, complete with sailing lessons and tennis tournaments. Brittany described the internship her father had arranged for her at a prestigious marketing firm in Manhattan. "And what about you, Emma?" Madison asked. "Any exciting plans before you start your job search?" Emma's face lit up for the first time all morning. "Actually, I'm hoping to move to Chicago or New York. I want to get into investment banking or corporate consulting, somewhere with real opportunities for advancement, you know? Somewhere I can build a career that matters. Somewhere far away from me, I thought but didn't say." The conversation continued around me like I was invisible. They discussed graduate school applications, networking events, career trajectories that would take my daughter into a world where people like me existed only as background figures. The maintenance staff who kept their offices clean, the service workers who brought their coffee, the invisible army of people who made their comfortable lives possible. I watched Emma laugh at Brittany's joke about avoiding the subway because of the types of people you encounter there. I listened to her agree with Ashley's assessment that manual labor was becoming obsolete in the modern economy. I sat there as my own daughter systematically dismantled every value I'd tried to instill in her, every lesson about respect and humility and the dignity of honest work. The check arrived, and I reached for it automatically. The habit of 23 years of being Emma's provider, her protector, her biggest supporter. But as I looked at the total, something shifted in my perspective. $187 for brunch. More than I made in a day after taxes. Money I'd planned to spend celebrating the relationship between a father and daughter, now feeling like payment for the privilege of being insulted. I pulled out my wallet, the worn leather one Emma had given me for Christmas 3 years ago. Back when she still seemed to care about making me happy. Back before her education had taught her to be ashamed of where she came from. "Daddy, you don't have to pay for everyone," Emma said, but her tone suggested she expected me to anyway. "The girls can cover their own meals." Madison waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be silly, Emma. It's Father's Day. Let your dad treat us. It's sweet that he wants to do something nice." Something nice, like I was a charity case trying to buy acceptance from people who would never consider me their equal. I signed the check and left a generous tip, knowing the server probably had more respect for my work than my own daughter did. As we prepared to leave, Brittany turned to me with that same practiced smile. "Thank you so much for brunch, Mr. Thompson. It was lovely meeting you. And Emma, you're so lucky to have such a hard-working father. He's obviously done everything he could to give you opportunities." The backhanded compliment hit its mark perfectly, acknowledging my effort while simultaneously emphasizing the limitations of my achievement. Emma beamed at her friend's diplomatic phrasing, apparently relieved that the awkwardness of her background had been handled so smoothly. We walked to the parking lot together, the girls chattering about their afternoon plans while I processed what had just happened. 25 years of sacrifice, of putting Emma's needs before my own, of working jobs that left me exhausted but proud because they provided for my daughter's future. And this was how she saw me. This was how she described me to her friends. Emma hugged me goodbye, the same perfunctory embrace she'd been giving me for months. "Thanks for brunch, Daddy. I'll call you later this week." But as I watched her drive away with her friends, I realized something had fundamentally changed between us. The illusion that we were still a team, still connected by the bonds that had carried us through loss and struggle, had been shattered by her casual cruelty. I sat in my truck in the country club parking lot, watching families celebrate Father's Day with genuine affection and respect. Children who seemed proud of their parents, regardless of their occupation. Parents who'd apparently succeeded in teaching their kids values that Emma had somehow missed along the way. That's when I made a decision that would change everything between us forever. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, something I'd been meaning to show Emma for months, but never found the right moment. The irony wasn't lost on me that sitting in a country club parking lot, nursing the wounds of my daughter's betrayal, would finally provide that moment. You see, Emma had made one critical assumption about my life, the same assumption her friends had made, the same assumption that most people make when they hear the word janitor. They assume limitation. They assume that manual labor equals financial struggle, that working with your hands means working without your brain, that honest work automatically means poorly compensated work. But Emma didn't know about the overtime rates at the university. She didn't know about the night differential pay that added 30% to my hourly wage. She didn't know that I'd been promoted to head custodial supervisor 3 years ago, managing a team of 15 people across 4 campus buildings. She'd never asked about my benefits package, my retirement contributions, or the side business I'd built doing maintenance work for local restaurants and office buildings. Most importantly, she didn't know that her old man had been investing 20% of his income for the past 18 years, building a portfolio that would have impressed her business school professors. The banking app loaded on my screen, displaying numbers that told a very different story than the one Emma had shared with her friends. My checking account balance alone was more than most college graduates made in their first year of employment. But that was just the beginning. I scrolled to my savings accounts, the emergency fund that could cover 2 years of expenses without touching investments, the vacation fund I'd been building to surprise Emma with a European trip for her birthday, back when I thought she'd want to travel with her embarrassing father, the home improvement fund that had grown substantial enough to renovate my entire house, though I'd been too busy working to use it. Then came the real surprise, the investment accounts that Emma's business education would have taught her to respect, even if she couldn't respect the man who'd built them. My 401k had crossed the $500,000 mark last year, boosted by aggressive employer matching and consistent contributions. The Roth IRA I'd maxed out every year since Emma started high school. The taxable investment account where I'd parked money from my side business, watching it compound over 2 decades of patient growth. But the crown jewel was something Emma had no idea existed. The rental property I'd purchased 5 years ago, just after Sarah died. A small duplex near the university that generated $1,500 monthly in passive income, while appreciating in value by nearly $40,000 over the past 5 years. The same property where several of Emma's former classmates now lived, paying rent to the janitor's daughter without realizing who their landlord was. I did the math quickly in my head, something that came naturally after years of budgeting every dollar to maximize Emma's opportunities. Total net worth, including real estate equity, investment accounts, and liquid savings, just over $1.2 million. Not bad for a guy whose daughter described him as someone who just mops floors and fixes toilets. The beautiful part wasn't even the money itself. It was the fact that I'd built this wealth while paying for Emma's private school tuition, her college expenses, her car, her insurance, her phone bill, and countless other expenses that she'd simply assumed were covered by some invisible force. I'd managed to secure my financial future while ensuring she graduated debt-free, something most of her wealthy friends couldn't claim. I thought about Madison, whose father's law firm was heavily leveraged and whose family lived paycheck to paycheck despite their impressive lifestyle. I thought about Ashley's family, whose retail empire was struggling against online competition, forcing them to take out loans against their real estate to maintain appearances. I thought about Brittany's parents, whose Hamptons house was mortgaged to the hilt and whose retirement savings had been decimated by poor investment choices and expensive vacations. These were the people Emma wanted to impress. These were the families she considered superior to ours. People who looked wealthy but were often drowning in debt, who prioritized image over substance, who taught their children that worth was measured by job titles rather than character or financial stability. My phone buzzed with a text message. Emma, probably feeling guilty about the brunch and wanting to smooth things over with some hollow gesture of affection. I almost didn't read it, but curiosity won out. Thanks again for brunch today, Daddy. I know my friends can be a lot sometimes. Love you. The message felt like salt in an open wound. She knew her friends were judgmental. She'd anticipated their reaction to learning about my job. And she'd decided that managing their opinion of her was more important than defending the man who'd raised her single-handedly for 18 years. I typed and deleted several responses. Part of me wanted to send screenshots of my account balances to shock her with the reality of her misconceptions. Part of me wanted to write a long message explaining how her words had hurt, how her dismissal of my work felt like a betrayal of everything I'd taught her about respect and dignity. Instead, I put my phone away without responding, because I realized that showing Emma my bank statements wouldn't solve the real problem. The issue wasn't that she thought I was poor. The issue was that she thought being poor would make me less worthy of respect. The problem wasn't her ignorance about my financial situation. The problem was her willingness to throw me under the bus to elevate her social standing. But I wasn't ready to let this go, not yet. I drove home to my house in the suburbs, the same house where Emma had grown up, where I'd helped her with homework at our kitchen table and taught her to ride a bike in our driveway. The house I'd paid off early by working those extra shifts she was now ashamed of. The house that was worth 3 times what I'd paid for it, representing another $200,000 in equity that Emma had never bothered to consider. Inside, I walked to my home office and pulled out a folder I'd been meaning to organize for months. Tax returns from the past 5 years, showing an annual income that would have surprised Emma's business professors. Pay stubs documenting the steady raises and promotions I'd earned through competence and reliability. Investment statements showing the power of compound growth over time. I spread the documents across my desk like evidence in a case I was building. Not against Emma, exactly, but against the assumptions she'd made about limitations and possibilities. Against the narrative that manual work meant manual thinking, against the prejudice that suggested my calloused hands couldn't also manage a calculator. The truth was, I'd been thinking about retirement lately, not because I had to, but because I could. The investments had grown large enough that I could walk away tomorrow and maintain my current lifestyle indefinitely. The rental income alone covered most of my monthly expenses, and I'd built enough wealth to handle any emergency or opportunity that might arise. I could retire at 52 and spend my time traveling, reading, pursuing hobbies that I'd deferred while building Emma's future. I could volunteer for causes I cared about, maybe teach financial literacy to young people who'd grown up without the advantages Emma had taken for granted. I could live comfortably without ever working another day, all because of the job my daughter found so embarrassing. But Emma didn't know any of this. She'd never asked about my retirement plans or my financial goals. She'd never shown curiosity about how I'd managed to pay for her education without taking loans or going into debt. She'd simply assumed that her opportunities had materialized through some combination of luck and minimal effort on my part. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Emma's number flashed on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something told me this conversation needed to happen now, while the wound was still fresh and the truth was still sharp enough to cut through years of accumulated assumptions. I answered on the third ring. "Hello, sweetheart. Daddy, I've been thinking about today, and I feel like maybe I should explain something." Here it comes, I thought. The rationalization, the excuse, the explanation that would somehow make her betrayal acceptable. I'm listening. It's just that, in my world now, people care a lot about backgrounds and connections. My friends, they don't understand what it's like to come from a different kind of family. I didn't want them to judge me based on assumptions about our financial situation. Our financial situation. The phrase hung between us like a confession she didn't realize she was making. What assumptions would those be, Emma? Well, people hear janitor and they automatically think struggle, think limitation. They assume we didn't have opportunities or advantages. I worked so hard in school, and I don't want people thinking I got where I am because of affirmative action or financial aid programs. The irony was breathtaking. Emma was worried about people assuming she'd needed help, when in fact I'd worked overtime for years to ensure she never needed help. She was concerned about appearing disadvantaged when she'd grown up with every advantage I could provide. "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Daddy." "What do you think I make in a year?" The question caught her off guard. I could hear her hesitation, the mental calculation she was trying to avoid making. "I don't know. I never really thought about it. Maybe 30,000, 40. Try 95,000 plus benefits, plus income from the rental property you don't know about, plus returns on investments I've been building since you were 5 years old." The silence on the other end was deafening. "What rental property?" Emma's voice came out small, confused. I leaned back in my office chair, looking at the investment statements spread across my desk like a hand of cards I was finally ready to play. "The duplex on Elm Street. Where your friend Jessica lived junior year. Where half your sorority sisters have rented apartments at some point. That's mine. Has been for 5 years now." The silence stretched longer this time. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, recalculating everything she thought she knew about our family's financial situation. "Daddy, I don't understand. If you have money, why do you still work as a janitor?" The question revealed everything wrong with her thinking, as if having money meant abandoning the work that built it, as if financial success required apologizing for the foundation that made it possible. "Because I'm good at my job, Emma. Because I take pride in my work. Because the university depends on people like me to function. And because that embarrassing job you described to your friends is what paid for your private school tuition, your college education, your car, and everything else you've taken for granted." I could hear her breathing change, the way it used to when she was little and trying not to cry after being caught in a lie. "But why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what? That I was successful? I thought you knew me well enough to assume I wasn't the failure you described to your friends today." The accusation hung between us like smoke. I wasn't just hurt by her assumptions about my bank account. I was devastated by her willingness to sacrifice my dignity for social acceptance. "I never said you were a failure. You said I was basically a janitor who mops floors and fixes toilets. You said it was honest work, I guess, but not what you pictured for your father. You agreed when your friend said each generation should do better than the last, implying I had somehow fallen short." "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it, Emma?" Another silence. Longer this time. I could imagine her in her apartment, the one I'd helped furnish, sitting on the couch I'd bought her for graduation, trying to find words that would undo the damage she'd caused. "I meant that your job doesn't reflect your intelligence or your capabilities. You're smart enough to have done anything, but you got stuck in maintenance work." Got stuck. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. 25 years of deliberate career choices reduced to an accident of circumstance. "Emma, I wasn't stuck anywhere. I chose this path. Do you know what I was doing before you were born?" "Working at the university, right? I was a mechanical engineer at Boeing. Salary, benefits, corner office, the whole package your friends would approve of. When your mother got pregnant, I made a choice. Boeing required travel, long hours, unpredictable schedules. The university offered stability, consistent hours, and the chance to be present for your childhood. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "You gave up engineering for me?" "I didn't give up anything. I chose something better. I chose being your father over impressing strangers with my job title. Apparently, that was a mistake in judgment." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was beyond caring about Emma's feelings. She'd spent the morning caring very little about mine. "Daddy, I'm sorry, I didn't know." "You didn't know because you never asked. In 23 years, you've never once inquired about my career goals, my financial planning, my retirement strategy, or my business investments. You simply assumed that because I work with my hands, I don't work with my brain." I stood up and walked to my filing cabinet, pulling out a folder I'd labeled Emma's Future years ago. Inside were documents she'd never seen: the life insurance policy that would make her wealthy if something happened to me, the education savings account that had grown to cover graduate school if she wanted it, the trust fund I'd established to ensure her financial security regardless of her career choices. "Emma, I need you to understand something. The money I've accumulated isn't luck or accident. It's the result of 25 years of strategic planning, disciplined saving, and smart investing. While you were worrying about impressing your sorority sisters, I was building generational wealth." "Generational wealth?" Her voice carried a note of disbelief. "The rental property will be yours someday. The investment accounts will transfer to you when I die. The house you grew up in, the one that's tripled in value, will become your inheritance. I've spent 2 decades building financial security not just for me, but for you and your future children." I could hear her crying now, soft sobs that reminded me of the little girl who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared her. "I'm so sorry, Daddy. I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what exactly?" "For being ashamed of you, for caring more about what my friends thought than about defending you, for assuming you were limited instead of realizing you were strategic." The apology felt genuine, but it couldn't undo the morning's revelation about who my daughter had become. Money hadn't been the real issue. Character was the problem, and bank statements couldn't fix that. "Emma, the saddest part isn't that you underestimated my income. It's that you thought my income determined my worth. Even if I made minimum wage, even if I struggled financially, I would still deserve your respect as the man who raised you." "I know that now." "Do you? Because your friends assumed I was poor and treated me like a charity case you were embarrassed by. And instead of defending me, you joined them. That tells me something about your values that has nothing to do with money." The conversation was getting too heavy, too real. I could feel Emma retreating into the defensive patterns she'd learned in childhood when confronted with uncomfortable truths. "What do you want me to do, Daddy? How do I fix this?" It was a fair question, but I didn't have a ready answer. How do you repair trust that's been shattered? How do you rebuild respect that's been carelessly thrown away? "I don't know, sweetheart. I honestly don't know." "Can I see you this week? Can we have dinner and talk about this properly?" I looked around my office at the evidence of a life well lived despite my daughter's assumptions. The investment statements, the property deeds, the business records from my side ventures, all the proof she'd never bothered to seek about who her father really was. "Emma, I need some time to think. Today was harder than you realize. It wasn't just about money or job titles. It was about watching my daughter choose social acceptance over family loyalty." "Please don't shut me out." "I'm not shutting you out. I'm protecting myself while I figure out what kind of relationship we can have going forward." The phrase hung in the air with finality neither of us had expected. What kind of relationship we can have. Not the relationship we'd always had, but something new, something that would need to be rebuilt from scratch. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Emma, but love isn't enough anymore. We need respect, honesty, and loyalty. Today showed me we're missing all 3. After I hung up, I sat in my office surrounded by the financial records of a successful life. The numbers were impressive, sure, but they felt hollow without someone to share them with, without a daughter who understood that wealth meant nothing without wisdom, that success required sacrifice, that true prosperity came from building something meaningful rather than just accumulating assets. I thought about Sarah and how she would have handled this situation. She'd always been better at reading people, better at understanding the subtle ways that values got transmitted from parent to child. Maybe she would have seen Emma's character flaws developing earlier. Maybe she would have corrected them before they became the kind of ingrained prejudices that could make a daughter ashamed of her father. Or maybe this was just who Emma was becoming, independent of my parenting or Sarah's influence. Maybe college and her new social circle had revealed character traits that were always there, just waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. My phone buzzed with a text message. Not Emma this time, but my brother Marcus, who lived across town with his wife and 3 kids. Hey bro, how was Father's Day brunch? Emma still treating you like a king? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Marcus had always been proud of my success, always bragged to his friends about his brother who'd built wealth through blue-collar work and smart financial planning. He understood something Emma had missed, that dignity came from character, not credentials. Interesting day, I typed back. I'll call you later. But I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. Not with Marcus, not with anyone. I needed time to process what had happened, to understand how the relationship with my daughter had deteriorated so completely without my noticing. I walked upstairs to Emma's old bedroom, which I'd kept exactly as she'd left it when she moved out after college. The walls were covered with photos from high school and college, pictures of Emma with friends at dances and parties and graduation ceremonies. In every photo, she was smiling, confident, surrounded by people who clearly adored her. But looking at those photos now, I realized something I'd missed before. In the later pictures, from college and beyond, I appeared less and less frequently. The high school photos showed father-daughter moments, Emma and me at her senior prom, both of us grinning as I helped pin her corsage. Emma and me at her graduation, my arm around her shoulders as we celebrated her acceptance to business school. But the college photos told a different story. Emma with her sorority sisters, Emma at networking events, Emma at internship celebrations. I was absent from the narrative of her adult life, relegated to the background like hired help who'd served their purpose and been dismissed. When had that happened? When had I gone from being her hero to being her embarrassment? I found the answer in a photo from her junior year of college. Emma at some formal event, dressed in an expensive gown I'd paid for, surrounded by classmates whose parents were doctors and lawyers and business executives. She was smiling, but something in her eyes looked different, calculating, like she was already measuring herself against their standards instead of the values I'd taught her. That was when she'd started changing the subject when people asked about my work. That was when she'd begun the slow process of editing me out of her success story, keeping the financial support while discarding the source of it. I sat on her old bed, surrounded by memories of the daughter I thought I knew, and realized that the Emma I'd raised might have been disappearing for years while I was too busy working to notice. The girl who used to help me with yard work on weekends had become a woman who was ashamed to admit her father did manual labor. The child who used to brag about my strength had become an adult who saw my calloused hands as evidence of limitation rather than capability. The worst part was that I'd enabled her transformation by shielding her from the realities of our financial situation. I'd wanted her to focus on her education and her future without worrying about money. I'd wanted to give her the gift of security, the freedom to pursue her dreams without the burden of economic anxiety. But in protecting her from financial stress, I'd also protected her from understanding the work and sacrifice required to build wealth. She'd grown up assuming that her opportunities were normal, that every father could afford private school and college without loans, that financial security was a given rather than an achievement. My phone rang again, Emma probably calling back to continue our conversation. But I wasn't ready to talk to her yet. I needed to decide what I wanted from our relationship going forward, what standards I was willing to accept, and what boundaries I needed to establish. Because today had taught me something crucial about my daughter's character, something I couldn't ignore or excuse. When forced to choose between defending her father and impressing her friends, she'd chosen her friends without hesitation. When faced with the opportunity to show loyalty to the man who'd sacrificed everything for her success, she'd chosen social climbing instead. That wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. That was a fundamental character flaw that would shape every relationship she'd ever have. And I wasn't sure it could be fixed with apologies or explanations or even the shock of learning about my true financial situation. The question now was whether I wanted to keep funding her lifestyle while she learned to respect me, or whether it was time to let her discover what the world looked like without her father's safety net. I decided that Emma needed to understand the true cost of her assumptions, not just the emotional cost to our relationship, but the financial reality of what it meant to bite the hand that had been feeding her for 23 years. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Janet Morrison, who'd been managing my investment portfolio for the past decade. Janet had watched my wealth grow from modest beginnings to substantial assets, and she understood better than most how discipline and smart planning could transform a working-class income into generational wealth. Robert, good to hear from you. How can I help you today? I need to make some changes to my accounts, Janet. Specifically, I want to remove Emma as the beneficiary on several of my investment accounts and set up some new structures. There was a pause on the other end. Janet had met Emma several times over the years at my annual financial review meetings. She'd seen my daughter's polite disinterest in discussions about portfolio allocation and retirement planning, her obvious boredom when we talked about the rental property income or the growth of my 401k. This sounds like a significant decision, Robert. Mind if I ask what's prompted this change? Let's just say I've had some clarity about Emma's priorities, and I think it's time she learned about consequences. Janet scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. I spent the morning researching something I'd never thought I'd need to consider: how to protect assets from ungrateful children. The internet was full of stories about wealthy parents whose kids had grown entitled and demanding, expecting inheritance while showing no respect for the people who'd built that wealth. I found articles about trust structures that could provide for children's needs while preventing them from accessing principal amounts. I read about parents who'd discovered their children's true character only after it was too late to teach better values. Most disturbing were the stories of adult children who'd cut off contact with parents once they realized the inheritance wasn't as large as expected. Was that Emma's future? Would she disappear from my life once she realized that respect and loyalty were now prerequisites for financial support? At Janet's office that afternoon, I outlined my new plan. First, I wanted to establish an irrevocable trust that would provide for Emma's genuine emergencies, but prevent her from accessing funds for lifestyle expenses she hadn't earned. Second, I wanted to change the beneficiaries on my life insurance policies, splitting them between legitimate charities and a scholarship fund I'd established for working-class students pursuing higher education. Robert, these are dramatic changes. Have you discussed this with Emma? Emma made her position clear yesterday. She's embarrassed by the source of her opportunities and more concerned with social status than family loyalty. I think it's time she learned what life looks like without the safety net she takes for granted. Janet reviewed my current financial picture, which was even more impressive than I'd remembered. The investment accounts had performed exceptionally well over the past 2 years, boosted by a bull market and my consistent contributions. The rental property had appreciated faster than expected, and I'd recently paid off the mortgage using cash from my side business profits. Your net worth has actually crossed $1.3 million since our last review, Janet noted, studying her computer screen. The real estate market surge pushed your home equity higher than projected, and your stock portfolio benefited from some excellent sector rotation choices we made last year. $1.3 million, more wealth than Emma's friends' families had, despite their impressive facades and country club memberships. Money I'd built through the work she described as anyone can do. Be tiny course. Janet, I want you to calculate something for me. How much money have I spent on Emma's expenses over the past 10 years? Education, car, insurance, phone bills, emergencies, everything. Janet pulled up the records she'd been tracking for tax purposes. Let me see here. Private high school tuition, college expenses, graduate school applications, living expenses during internships, car payments, insurance premiums, medical expenses not covered by her policy. She worked quietly for several minutes, her calculator clicking steadily. Robert, the total comes to approximately $340,000 over 10 years. $340,000. More than most people made in a decade, spent on a daughter who described my work as basically janitorial and not what she'd pictured for her father. And how much has she contributed to her own expenses during that time? Janet consulted another file. Based on the tax documents you've provided, Emma's total earned income over those 10 years was roughly $85,000 from part-time jobs and internships. Most of that appears to have gone toward discretionary spending rather than necessities. So I'd covered nearly 80% of Emma's expenses while she spent her own earnings on entertainment and luxuries. No wonder she'd developed an entitled attitude about money. She'd never experienced the connection between work and reward, never felt the weight of financial responsibility. Janet, I want to draft a letter to Emma explaining the changes I'm making. Not mean-spirited, just factual. She needs to understand that financial support is a privilege, not a right, and that privileges can be revoked when they are not appreciated. Are you sure about this approach, Robert? Sometimes these situations can be resolved with conversation rather than financial consequences. I thought about Emma's phone call the night before, her tears and apologies after learning about my true financial situation. The remorse had seemed genuine, but it was remorse about being wrong, not remorse about being cruel. She was sorry she'd misjudged my bank account, not sorry she'd thrown me under the bus for social acceptance. Janet, if Emma had defended me yesterday, if she'd shown loyalty or respect or even basic decency, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But she chose to humiliate me in front of her friends, and then she was only sorry after she discovered her mistake was financially costly. Janet nodded slowly. She'd worked with wealthy families long enough to recognize the patterns of entitlement and the challenges of raising children who understood the value of money versus the values that created it. All right, Robert, let me draft some documents for your review. We can establish the trust structure and modify the beneficiary designations. But I'd recommend including a provision that allows Emma to earn back her inheritance through demonstrated changes in behavior and attitude. What kind of provision? Something that requires her to show genuine understanding of your values. Maybe a requirement that she work in a service job for a full year or volunteer a certain number of hours with working-class communities. Something that would give her perspective on the people she looked down on yesterday. The idea had merit. Emma needed to understand that wealth came from work, that dignity existed at every income level, and that character mattered more than career titles. A year of serving others might teach her lessons that 23 years of privilege had failed to instill. Janet, let's include that provision, but make it substantial, not a token gesture, but real experience with the world she's so eager to rise above. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the documents Janet had prepared. The trust paperwork was complex, full of legal language that protected my assets while providing a path for Emma to earn them back through character development rather than entitlement. The letter I'd write to Emma would be harder. How do you explain to your daughter that her cruelty had cost her an inheritance? How do you teach someone about respect by withdrawing the financial support they'd taken for granted? I started writing several times, each draft either too harsh or too forgiving. Finally, I settled on a tone that was firm but not vindictive, clear about consequences while leaving room for redemption. Dear Emma, I began, our conversation yesterday helped me understand that we have very different values about work, wealth, and family loyalty. Your willingness to describe me as basically a janitor to impress your friends showed me that you're not ready for the financial responsibility that comes with being my heir. I outlined the changes I was making, explaining that the trust would provide for genuine emergencies, but not lifestyle maintenance. I described the requirements she'd need to meet to restore her inheritance, emphasizing that respect couldn't be purchased but had to be earned through demonstrated character change. The money I've built over 25 years didn't come from luck or accident. It came from work you find embarrassing, discipline you've never had to develop, and sacrifice you've never been asked to make. If you want to inherit wealth, you need to understand what creates it and respect the people who build it. I sealed the letter in an envelope and set it aside. Tomorrow I'd mail it along with copies of the legal documents that would change Emma's future forever. Tonight, I wanted to sit with the decision and make sure I was acting from wisdom rather than anger. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. Emma again, probably wanting to continue our conversation from the night before. This time, I answered. Hi, sweetheart. Daddy, I've been thinking all day about what you told me, about your income and the rental property and everything I didn't know. I feel terrible about how I acted. What specifically do you feel terrible about? About underestimating you, about not realizing how successful you've been, about making assumptions based on your job title instead of asking about your actual situation. Notice what she didn't mention. Nothing about the cruelty of her words, nothing about the betrayal of humiliating me in front of her friends, nothing about choosing social status over family loyalty. She was sorry about being wrong, not sorry about being mean. Emma, do you understand why your words hurt me? Because I made you sound poor when you're actually wealthy. No, sweetheart, that's not why they hurt. Then why? They hurt because you were willing to throw me under the bus to impress people who don't matter. They hurt because you showed more concern for your image than for my dignity. They hurt because you demonstrated that you're ashamed of the work that built your opportunities. But now that I know the truth about your finances, the truth about my finances doesn't change what happened yesterday. Even if I made minimum wage, even if I struggled to pay bills, I would still deserve respect as your father and as a human being who works honestly for a living. Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. You're right. I should have defended you regardless of money. Yes, you should have. How do I make this right, Daddy? I don't know if you can, Emma. Respect isn't something you can apologize back into existence. Trust isn't something you can rebuild with words. What are you saying? I'm saying that our relationship is going to be different going forward. I'm not going to keep funding a lifestyle for someone who's ashamed of where that funding comes from. You're cutting me off? The panic in her voice was immediate and telling. Not concern about losing her father's love or respect, but fear about losing her father's financial support. Emma, I'm restructuring how our family finances work. You're 23 years old with a business degree. It's time you learn to support yourself instead of depending on money you don't respect. But my apartment lease, my car payment, my student loans. Your student loans were paid off before you graduated. Your car is titled in your name, free and clear. Your apartment lease is a choice you made based on income you assumed you'd have. I can't afford my rent without your help. Then you'll need to find a less expensive apartment or get a job that pays enough to cover your choices. What kind of job? I'm still looking for something in my field. Emma, yesterday you told your friends that my job was something anyone can do. If that's true, then you can do it too while you search for your dream career. The silence on the other end was deafening. The idea of Emma working a service job, of actually doing the kind of work she'd dismissed as beneath her ambitions, clearly hadn't occurred to her as a possibility. You want me to work as a janitor? I want you to work, period. Whether that's maintenance, retail, food service, or something in your degree field doesn't matter to me. What matters is that you learn the connection between effort and reward, between work and dignity. But what will my friends think? And there it was, the same concern that had started this whole mess. What would her friends think? Not what would she learn, not how would she grow, not what values would she develop, just the eternal question of how her choices would affect her social standing. Emma, if your friends judge you for honest work, they're not the kind of people whose opinions should matter to you. Easy for you to say. You don't have to live in my world. Your world? You mean the world where people are valued based on their job titles instead of their character? Where manual work is shameful and financial support is expected without gratitude? That world. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant, and that's exactly the attitude that's going to change if you want any kind of relationship with me going forward. I could hear Emma crying softly on the other end of the line. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to take back my harsh words and restore the easy relationship we'd always had. But I knew that would be enabling the same entitled thinking that had created this problem in the first place. Daddy, please don't do this. I promise I'll change. I promise I'll be better. Emma, promises are just words. I need to see actions. I need to see you demonstrate respect for working people, including your father. I need to see you take responsibility for your own expenses and your own choices. How long do I have? Your rent is paid through the end of this month. After that, you're on your own. 3 weeks? It's not enough time to find a job and get settled? It's enough time if you're willing to take any honest work instead of holding out for the perfect career opportunity. Emma's sobs grew louder. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I'm not doing anything to you, sweetheart. I'm stopping doing things for you. There's a difference. What's the difference? The difference is that I raised you to be independent and self-sufficient, but I've been enabling dependence by removing all the natural consequences of your choices. That ends now. But I need time to adjust, time to figure things out. Emma, you've had 4 years of college to figure things out. You have a business degree and 23 years of life experience. You have everything you need to succeed except the willingness to work for it. After I hung up, I walked to my mailbox and dropped the letter I'd written earlier. By tomorrow afternoon, Emma would understand that her father's financial support came with conditions she'd never had to meet before. Respect, gratitude, and basic human decency weren't negotiable anymore. I sat on my front porch in the gathering darkness, thinking about the different ways this situation could unfold. Emma might surprise me by rising to the challenge, finding work she'd previously considered beneath her, and learning lessons about dignity and self-reliance that would serve her for life. Or she might double down on her entitlement, expecting me to cave when faced with her struggles, assuming that parental love meant unlimited financial support regardless of how that support was treated. Either way, I'd sleep better, knowing I was finally teaching my daughter the values I should have insisted on years earlier. The money I'd built through honest work would go to people who understood its value, whether that was Emma after she'd learned to respect it, or organizations that would use it to help others climb the ladder I'd climbed myself. Sarah would have been proud of me tonight, I thought. She'd always worried that I was too generous with Emma, too willing to shield her from life's natural consequences. "You can't protect her from everything, Robert," she used to say. "Sometimes the best gift you can give a child is letting them face the results of their choices." Tonight, I'd finally given Emma that gift. Whether she'd recognize it as love disguised as tough love remained to be seen.